Let's build multi-touch attribution in HubSpot. Sarah's joining us today to help us do that. How you doing, Sarah?
I am doing good. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to have you because this is a topic that, um, it's you said something super interesting that we'll get into before. But this topic of like attribution and like we have all these tools built to do it, but similar to lead scoring, in my opinion, like how many people have actually gotten good at it, like using the data to put the picture together that everybody can understand. So super excited to talk to you about it today. But let's start with a couple why questions. First one being like why attribution in the first place, and maybe specific to today's conversation, why multi-touch attribution.
Yeah. So specifically to my experience, I have both worked as a strategic advisor and in-house as marketing operations leader for startups. And attribution over the last few years has become such a buzzword. And so I was tasked at multiple places to own figuring out right what attribution meant, what we needed, and what was going to be best for the companies. And as I continued through that journey, and then now as a freelance consultant, there is a need. There is a need for revenue attribution. There is a need at the executive level, at the board level, to have clean snapshots of how things are performing. And in order to do that, multi-touch, in my opinion, is absolutely required. You have to have some sort of multi-touch attribution. Now that can go in a million different directions in and of itself, but we need to be able to show that it really continues to be omni-channel marketing. We're still coming around our B2B buyers. We're still engaging with them throughout their life cycle. And so the only way to really show that from an attribution perspective is to do multi-touch. So that's why the multi-touch piece.
Okay, that's fair. So sounds like a valuable activity. Yet, before we started the show, you shared a concern that you're worried about becoming the attribution lady. Why is that a concern for you? I think I know why, but I'm interested to hear. Like,
Yeah, no, so I built this Goldilocks attribution model out of a desperate need to have something that was simple and effective in HubSpot Pro, both for myself as an internal head of marketing operations, but also for clients as a consultant. And it was sheerly out of necessity because of limited resources and frustrations with larger attribution software systems. That said, I am one of the people out of lots of people who have some harsh views about attribution and how it should be used and when it should be used and if it really is worth the time and the investment and the priority that we're giving it, especially in a lot of small to medium businesses. So I have some harsh views on that. And because of that, I'm happy to provide the solutions that I've found to work. But my bigger passion is really that middle of the funnel puzzle solving. How do you optimize your conversion path and create synergy between your sales and marketing initiatives and strategy? And that's where I put the majority of my time as a consultant. So, absolutely want this resource to be utilized by people. Also, at some point in time, if it takes off, I'm going to have to be like, and now we do talk about lead scoring, and that's the that's the next topic that we'll dive into and make sure is really effective for people.
yeah, now that resonates so hard because, and I commend you because I am not so compromising in terms of like, just don't talk to me. Like, I can see your data model. It is not prepared for any kind of attribution discussion.
Yeah.
So let's just focus on that. But you're right. Like, I think the way that this is one of those cases where the software platforms haven't done any kind of good services for the business leaders out there. And it's easy to show it as a shiny object. Oh, you can do lead scoring, you can do attribution, you can do this. And then when you're onboarded, they make sure you do that part, no matter how good the data is. If you don't understand the customer journey, like all these things that matter for that stuff to matter, it's kind of been like the tools and the HubSpots of the world kind of driving the importance of this before people understand the strategy
Yeah.
behind it. And that's where it's like this game that you ask anybody who knows, they might not know anything about HubSpot other than things like, oh, it's lead gen, or I want to do lead scoring, or all these things where it's like, oh, I've never, maybe I haven't really seen a lot of businesses actually get value out of that part, but the executive level, leadership levels, they know things like that. So there has to be some level of addressing that, right? And that's where I think it sounds like that's where you got, where it's like, okay, I know attribution is going to come up. I know you're probably not prepared to solve for it. So here, let's take this, make sure data looks good, or show that it doesn't look good. And now instead of figuring out that piece, we can move to like more valuable things or the other things to kind of support that. Is that where you're
Yeah,
kind
I
of
think you
seeing?
hit on the head when you're talking about it coming from the perspective of executives, right? These are things that they're asking for, that their board has pressure on them to be able to produce. And so they know that it's a need and they know what they need a lot of times in terms of what question they're trying to answer, what they're trying to be able to show. And then they're relying on their teams to go out and figure out what combination of software and data analysis are going to get them there, right? They have to be able to hand that off. And I think that's where these large software solutions are coming in and being able to sell them on, hey, you have this question, I'm going to give you the answer, use us, right? And that's a great selling tactic. And I'm not here to like poo poo all on attribution software. There's some great benefits to a lot of the systems out there, but I think that that's what they're doing really well, is they're targeting the executive buyer to say, well, answer the question. Where I personally have seen the pain is when you're in organizations where like every month you're looking at your sales and marketing KPIs together, and every month there's a conversation about, well, is this real? Well, what about this? What about this caveat? Well, maybe we need to change it and look at the numbers from this perspective. And it's always evolving, and you're never really getting anywhere to decisive decision making value, because all of the time spent trying to understand what the data actually is to start with. And like, have you taken out outliers, and what are all the expectations around it? So, for me, from an attribution perspective, I was really surprised when I onboarded with a big provider, um, how many of those holes I was left to fill as the operator. I had to set up all of the integrations. I had to look for the double counting. I had to see if, we needed to change the parameters of which activities to view or when activities happened to view them. And I was just shocked that there wasn't kind of like really good best practices for data analysis incorporated into the system. So, the three things that really bothered me that I was trying to figure out solutions for, one was ABM perspective, right? In the B2B journey, every contact in a company is influencing whether they decide to buy your product or not, right? Indirectly or directly. And so when I do attribution, I want all of their activities with my brand incorporated into the model. I don't just want my primary buyer or just the few people that maybe are associated with the deal. I want everybody. And that was really hard to get to. The other thing that I really wanted was true revenue. So I've had some startups especially be like, well, I can get all of the attribution like pretty easily, right? Like, why would I pay to do something. And it's like, yes, you can get influenced revenue at the channel level pretty much everywhere now, which is fantastic that I can go into LinkedIn, look at my advertising, and be able to see campaign by campaign potentially what the influenced revenue impact is for each of those. And that helps me compare at the channel level what to do. What it doesn't do is roll up to 100% of my revenue. I can't say we made 100 grand, this 20,000 I'm going to say was credited from LinkedIn ads. And that is really hard to find, in my opinion, done in a way that I, as a mathematician, as my background, like approve. So having all of the numbers of all the channels actually roll up to 100% of the revenue, that was like a requirement. I really wanted that. And I think that for me is the like number one thing to give to your board is non-squishy numbers. We need something that totals 100%.
Yeah. Now, if you're like, the biggest challenge in these meetings is like, if anybody gets a sense of the need to ask the question, is this real? Like, it just wrecks the whole credibility of the presentation, the dashboard, the report, like whatever you're looking at. And now you're spending the whole time answering that question instead of like, what do we do with this
Right.
data that we're looking at? So I love that you brought that up. And oh man, like I'm having a lot of conversations like that related to customer platform and like, what does commerce mean, for HubSpot? And like, orders is an object that is coming out, and I
Yeah.
think it's going to be the most transformational object in the history of HubSpot,
Mm.
because of what you just highlighted, is that there has always been a sales and marketing view of revenue, and then there is a financial view of
Yep.
revenue,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
And when you don't have non-sales and marketing data coming into the system from accounting, from operations, from post-sale activity, HubSpot cannot be a source of truth for revenue.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
like the other point you mentioned about all this activity related, like one of the things I thought hard on earlier this year is like when I had a sales leader come and say, like, well, we do a bunch of business B2C, but I don't want to bring it into HubSpot because
Mm.
then they'll have to list them as marketing contacts. And it's like, instead of calling it like a CRM, like traditionally, like customer relationship management, I started referring to it as communication and relationship management.
Mm.
Because if we care about the relationship with this person, get them in HubSpot.
Yeah.
Like, and that was what it took, because there's such a like sales CRM is like a huge red flag for me if I'm talking to anybody about it, because they just cut off email, like simple things like emails that should be in the system and they're not, because it's supply chain, even though the information in the email is very relevant to
Yeah.
me and the person who just did business with me right now, because I got to tell them that the supply chain has changed and there's a delay, or the costs have gone up or gone down, and all that impacts the relationships that we're trying to build.
Mm.
And until like it's not all encompassing multi-touch, like until you're including that stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, and that hits on something too. You said all encompassing, and um I don't think there is such a thing yet. And like you and I kind of hit on this before we started the show, which is, AI will probably change that pretty soon, right? Like I'm sure somebody's working on just making all of this really lovely. But that said, I don't think that having every single touch point is super viable. I also don't know that it's really necessary because, again, if you're trying to make business decisions based off of these metrics, right? Then from an attribution perspective, there's really only certain things that you care about. And then there's other things that are just part of doing business that you know are required, right? You know your sales team needs to have discovery calls, needs to be following up, needs to be engaging with people. A lot of that is just part of your sales process that you know how to make it work, and you monitor and modify activity plans based on what is your, rate to get them to move down the funnel. Separately, revenue attribution, you don't need to calculate off of every single sales call or every single email in a sequence that you sent out, right? You are trying to answer specific questions about your primary channels of influence that you're investing in, and being able to tell that overarching narrative to your executive team and to the board. And so that's why, like, in the model that I'm built, baseline, you have 12 channels. And now I custom built it for someone, and we had like 26 total channel pieces that we were monitoring, right? But everybody has like a core 12. That's where you can start, and then you can get nuanced from there. But I don't think that you need everything included, because you can prove out those values of those channels and those activities at a very granular level with the specialist who's over that area, versus looking at it from total investment, total go-to-market vision, decision making.
Right. Nah, I think that's something we have to accept for sure, because there are so many immeasurables,
Yeah.
almost always related to word of mouth. Like, it always comes back to that, right? Like,
Yes.
good luck measuring that, unless you have a ridiculously, OCD sales team that just like puts everything in the CRM,
Yeah.
like that. But I'm interested to see, like, I think at this point, I'd love for you to share um, what that looks like in HubSpot. Uh, and because I've got some ideas, I've got some more questions. I'll just say that.
Sounds good. Yeah, let me share my screen, and I can kind of show you what it is that I'm building. And I've got some dummy data in here that we can look at too. But the goal of this model is one within HubSpot Pro. So obviously, if you're in HubSpot Marketing Enterprise, you can use the attribution tools that are now in there. And the investment more becomes making sure you have a really great operations person who can set that up and consult on what it all means. This is specifically for pro users. And again, the goal being, I want 100% of the revenue defined by the last quarter or the type of revenue it is. That's up to the individual business unit, right? But I want that bucket to be divided into my primary channels so that I can at one glance say, okay, 23% of our revenue for this quarter, I am directly saying came from paid search. And I just want to be able to hit that on the head and just say that with conviction, knowing how I came up with that number, what's included in it, and that it's defensible, right? And if I know those things, then to your point, we're not spending our time in these meetings talking about, well, is that a true number? Where did it come from? You clarify it, you get everybody on the same page of how it's being calculated. And then you can move into telling your narrative of, hey, we were investing 50% of our budget over this quarter into paid, and 23% of our revenue is being attributed to it. We think that's because we have a lag time of 3 months. And so this is totally okay for the metric to be there, right? We're going to look at this in 6 months, and this is what we expect that number to be at that point. Or you can pivot into conversations saying, hey, we had way lower percentage coming in our in-person events attributed revenue for this quarter. We still think in-person events are really valuable, but this quarter we had scaled back because of budget constraints. Next year, we're actually going to invest more and we believe that the return there is going to be much bigger. So when you see this again, you're actually going to see events being credited with much more of the revenue because we are doubling down into our investment there, right? So you can tie back your strategy of what you're seeing in the marketplace, what your team are giving you as insights into this very top line, very simplistic report, to then again speak to your narrative, your plan, your strategy, instead of spending all the time answering questions about where did the number come from? Is it real? Do we trust it? Why is paid so much bigger than LinkedIn? Why is, like, you don't have to spend all of your time in that. You know exactly how it was calculated, and then you move on.
Yeah. And this level of like the whole goal here is to get to a level of reporting common language.
Yes.
So that like, I mean, those terms on the left, I think like it's the number of people I've worked with is the number of versions of that slide that defines those things. Right.
100%.
Right.
100%. And so I do think there's always, and even within this dashboard, like, this is super simple. You're looking at a couple pie charts, right? There's nothing here that's super exciting or in depth. You don't have overlay charts over time, right? This is very simple. And yet within this, there are so many layers that you have to pull back to make sure that you do understand exactly what you're speaking to. So for instance, this top one is looking at all of the closed won revenue for activities that any contact on a company had within their entire life cycle. Very first touch point of the contact all the way through to when the deal closed. And it's capturing all of those activities, and that's what is being used to come up with the actual distribution. Down here, we're narrowing the aperture, and we're actually saying we only care about the activities that happened up until opportunity creation. We still want to take all of the revenue, but we're going to divide the pie differently because we just care about activities before really the sales cycle started. And so very similar, right? But those are two completely different calculations. They're two completely different ways of looking at it. And so you've got to be able to understand what those nuances are so that you interpret it correctly, but also so you can speak to it with confidence when you are presenting on it.
Yeah. And not to downplay, but I think matter of fact, like getting to this place where it's matter of fact, like this is the data. We all know what these words mean. There's no questioning of is it real or is not, or why we're showing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we talked about before we started this. I always challenge when I see somebody trying to create attribution for the purposes of, oh, I need to prove the value of marketing,
Yeah.
or I need sales to respect me. Like that's not the place you want to be coming from.
Right.
And, I'd love talking to people to help you move from that place.
Mm.
But understanding that if we get to this place where this is just the layers, like you said, because one of the first things you're going to have to deal with, and this helps create the definitions in the first place, because we all know how challenging direct traffic
Right.
can be. And when you're in the moment and you're having to explain, well, if they click the link over here, it's going to show up like this. But if they did it this way, then it's showing like this. And it's like, well, that's not direct traffic. I know, but that's how HubSpot. And it's like,
Right.
boom, done. Like you're done with the value of the activity at that point, right?
Yep.
If you start with this place where it's just, hey, here's everything. Here's the visibility, right? Now let's go through each one. And is it really direct traffic or not? And if it's not, what do we need to do to classify it differently? And which classification should we give it? Should it go in another one? Or at this point, we just click in and now we're looking at something else that's not direct traffic to help us understand what's in this layer, right? And
Mm-hmm.
just one by one, the last thing you want to do is think that you're going to get this dashboard or this setup from Sarah and be like, okay, I'm cool. Like I'm done with attribution now, right? We're good to go.
It's now perfect. Yeah, and I think one of the things though that's important about that is recognizing the limitations of any model, right? You need to understand that anything that you use is going to come up against a wall, whether it's that you can't have every single touch point that ever happens, right? Or that you just have things that happen offline and yeah, they're not going to be here, right? Like there's always going to be limitations to that. And so that's why it's so important that you're not taking this as the complete picture of your company. This is a tool. This is to let your executive team and your board have a meaningful conversation about past performance and future plans. That's it. It is a snapshot. That is its purpose, right? The way you choose which one of these to utilize depends on your business model and how you are approaching marketing and sales. And so, if it makes sense to limit the timeline aperture to just pre opportunity or not, you pick those things as you go through. And I think that's why serving as a consultant is so valuable because I can help clients kind of think through those choices so that as we're even building, we are already thinking through, oh, that's why email as a channel is not included in here. Okay, got that in the back of my mind now for if it does come up as a question. Okay, that's why we're not going to directly be diving into the numbers associated with direct traffic. Okay, have that in the back of my mind now, right? Like you have those pieces so that you can keep the conversations to be as beneficial as possible, diving into the things that you do know and that you are proactively working on. Because instead of spending the time trying to figure out what the direct traffic was actually being driven from, why aren't we focusing on, hey, that conversation is a brand conversation. We're going to get to that in 2 slides and be talking about how we continue to improve our share of voice in the marketplace, right? That's where that conversation happens. Instead, when we're looking at these, we're going to be diving into our primary channels of influence so that we can explain to you how our strategy from the last quarter worked or didn't and what we're pivoting in the future and how this particular chart is going to change in 3 months, right? That should be the conversation around it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and creating these stepping stones, because I think at the end of the day, we want alignment like throughout the organization. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we doing what we are doing? Everybody should know the answer to that question for
Right.
everything that they're doing, right? And that's where it's be so challenging when you start to show stuff like this. It's like, okay, we're doing all the things, and that's where it can be easy to just say create dashboard using one of HubSpot's templates.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this tells a story. And it's like, no, it doesn't. Or it tells a story that people are just going to punch holes in left and right and they disengage. Instead, like you definitely have to know yourself if you're the one presenting this, how this data is generated, how it's captured, like how it looks here. And I think that's where a quick tool like this would go a long way in terms of like, just putting it in there and kind of raising where you start at in terms of
Right.
learning how it
Yep.
all comes together, right?
And I think that's the benefit. It's a starting point. It lets you be able to have the conversation with your board while you're still an SMB, company. And you're purchasing the model and then you're done. You're not stuck in this $30,000 a year cycle of something that you're still building and you're still changing it each year and you're still adapting, right? It gets you the starting point. You have your stepping stone. You get to have those commonality of language now, and then you can change it in the future if you need to get more advanced.
Yeah, because you will change it,
Yeah.
um, because like to get the others to buy in. Let's say we're speaking from a marketing ops perspective, like to get sales buy-in, to get leadership buy-in, service, like you have to be able to discuss these things with them,
Mm.
and then field very quickly and make changes when you say, okay, this is like, this thing says it was from organic search. And the sales guy says, oh, I met that guy at a show like, 2 weeks before they even hit Google there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, that's valuable information. Now let's figure out, like, are you going to put that in the CRM next time? Maybe. And then
Yep.
we can see that. And like maybe a little less combative. Uh, but having this foundation to say, okay, this is what happens
Yep.
when we change it, right? And this is why it's so important for you to add that to the CRM for everybody watching to see, like, okay, of course, organic search. Like, if we spend all our money on events and organic search is saying 90% of the revenue is coming from organic search, like something is missing, right?
Right.
Let's fill in that gap together.
Absolutely.
This is
Absolutely.
awesome. I think every, you know, um, the double-edged sword of HubSpot is that it can be so easy to make a lot of things happen like this because the data is there, right? That's the superpower of HubSpot is
Yeah.
that it helps you capture the data.
Well, and there's versions of this that I'm hoping to pursue in the future where it is actually just using the HubSpot data that's available. Right now, this is a completely built model and process using 7 workflows and like 80 some odd fields, most of which are custom calculation fields. So the end report, beautifully simplistic. That's the goal. The back end is a little messy. So I hope that at some point in time I can figure out how to massage and use more like custom events and things to go back and actually pull in historic data. This for now is like you build it, it starts basically taking a ticker of each of your different interaction points and then summarizing them. So it's future. You build it and then it starts accumulating for the future.
Yeah.
I've gone back and like manually done backfill data and stuff for clients in the past, but yeah, that's the primary build behind it.
No, I think that's important to share because,
Yeah.
again, this is a starting point, and you can, like, as long as you're documenting the decisions that you're making, based on it. But the first ones are like related to understanding what the data sources are, like
Mm-hmm.
where it's coming from. Because
Yep.
you could say, like, look, we've got 15 years of historical data. That's going to be a lot of work. We're not going to touch it.
Right.
But here's what that means for the data we're looking at. It
Mm.
starts at this date.
Yep.
Maybe we don't use some products anymore. So the average lifetime value might look a little different than what we know to be true. Like
Right.
being able to say, like, here's what it means because we know there's gaps because we chose not to fill them.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's the purpose is you have to know the gaps because there's always gaps. So at least when you're building from scratch, you know exactly what you've built and exactly what you have purposefully left out. And I think that allows you to speak with a lot of confidence to your information and remove some of those unknowns because it's just narrowing what it is that we're focused on. Why do we have this? Why are we looking at it? What is it here to serve? Instead of it being this all encompassing, you could do anything maybe with the data that we've provided, right? So I do think there's a benefit to kind of having that narrower view.
Yeah. And I think that you touched on, at the end of the day, when you're talking to leadership and executives and even leaders of other departments, they just want you to be confident. Like they want you to have intention of why you're showing them the thing, right? And when you approach it from oh, we could measure all the things everywhere. One, they're going to think you're full of shit.
Mm-hmm.
Two, they're going to continually ask you for things that they know are not tracked yet. And instead of being like, Mr. or Mrs. Fix It and going to do it, that's, you know, nobody wants that. That's not in anybody's best interest, right?
Right.
But that's kind of an expectation that you're setting by saying, oh, we got this new software, I can do everything, right? It's like, no, they need you to say, here's the data that's real.
Mm-hmm.
And it could just be closed won, closed lost at the beginning. right?
Yeah.
Starting there and say, hey, this is what matters right now. This is real data. This is what it means to our business. This is what I need from the team to support, like, continuing to move through the layers, continuing to make this better. Because I'm just a marketer. I think this is what's important to the business, but I know everybody else has ideas, and we need to get on the same page so that it's not me processing the communication for you. We have dashboards that everybody can go to whenever they want.
Right.
And then we're having the conversations. Like, if you could just let yourself dream, the conversations on a weekly basis, you just remove all of those conversations where it's like, how do we talk about the same thing every week and nothing ever gets done?
Right.
Right? Those
Yep.
things, those go away,
Yep.
right? Because you've got this level of insight that just leads to less questions about,
What am I looking
why
for?
we're doing it,
Yeah.
and more about what it means for the business and what actions we should be taking.
Yep. Absolutely.
So that's why we're here. We want to help you get to that point, very badly. I thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing this.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be, pretty powerful. What's one takeaway that you want to leave leave the viewer with today?
Yeah. I mean, I think if people are ready to be pursuing attribution, and they want to have a conversation about it, my calendar's open, always happy to talk to people and advise them if their data set is something that, like, you should go all in with something like HubSpot Enterprise or with an external software to plug in, and do attribution that way. Or if you're at a spot where building a building block, as you go makes a lot of sense, great, happy to equip there. I think the main decision points are going to be, do you want it to be ABM based or primary decision only when you're doing attribution? What channels are important to you as a company? Do you want it to be your full life cycle or only pre-op activities? Those are some of the primary pieces that you need to already be starting to think through. And then as we come to those conclusions, that'll inform how you decide if you build versus buy.
Awesome. No, I think that's a great way to end it. And so if you're thinking about your attribution, whether you're excited about it or just want it to be off your desk, um, we challenge you to find those opportunities, and let's grow. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks.